How much success have they had? And I think it's very appropriate that Curt Schilling is out supporting this guy. Now, do Major League Baseball pitchers, do they make any money? Would they benefit, like, from tax cuts for the wealthy, which, of course, Brown supports? What do middle-class voters think Scott Brown is going to be doing for them if he gets in the United States Senate? He has no plan when it comes to health care. He wants to be like the rest of the jokers in the Republican Party and just be an obstructionist, say no to everything, start all over, of course. He wants to be the 41st vote against health care. Now, that's not what this election should be about. Ted Kennedy's wife, Vicki, put it perfectly.
Ted always said elections are about the future. They're about moving forward. They're about taking action. They're not about saying no.
You know, that is so to the point. Would you go out and vote because I just don't like the way things are? Or would you go out and vote because you know what direction your candidate is going to take and what the agenda is going to be? Saying no is what the Republicans done all year. It's what Scott Brown is going to do, be right in lockstep with the Mitch McConnells of the world. That's all they've got. They're all about destroying Barack Obama and change in Washington. Massachusetts, we're headed in the right direction with President Obama's agenda. It's a heavy lift. He has admitted that. But that doesn't mean we quit now. Would Ted Kennedy, would he quit? So we can do this. But all Scott Brown will do is take this country in the wrong direction again. You want to go back to Bush Cheney? I am amazed. I can't believe the independent voters. I'm asking myself, and I have been all day for the last several days on the radio show as well, what has this candidate done to garnish all this goodwill in the polls from independent voters? When he is a top 2% kind of guy. He's not a Wall Street regulator. He's an anti-labor guy. Middle classers in Massachusetts, what has Barack Obama done to have you turn against him in the 11th hour when we're trying to get something revolutionary done in Washington? Tell me what you think in our telephone survey tonight. The number to dial is 1-877-ED-MSNBC. And my question tonight is, do you think today's special election in Massachusetts is a referendum on President Obama? Press 1 for yes and press 2 for no, and I'll bring you the results later on in the show. All right, for more on the latest on the election and what is happening in Massachusetts, let's go to NBC's Kelly O'Donnell tonight, who is in Boston. Kelly, the independent numbers, what are you hearing on the ground? First of all, the turnout. Has this been a good day for turnout? I mean, have voters been awakened at this moment?
On turnout, yes, there are bigger than expected crowds in many places across the state, and it's being judged by the special election numbers. Typically, and in this case, it's just one race. It happens to be an enormous race here, but usually voters don't turn out in great numbers. So now it's being compared to, well, a midterm election. What kind of numbers would that pull? And this seems to be exceeding even that, but not yet rising to the level of a presidential race in terms of turnout. So all of the buzz, all of the attention has certainly got Massachusetts voters wanting to follow through and go to the polls and actually vote. So that has been an interesting part of watching this day unfold. So many things about this race, Ed, are remarkable. And when you talk about independent voters, nothing scientific here, but we've been talking to people, conversations on the street, trying to get a sense of what is motivating them. And again, we hear an anger and dissatisfaction for the way things are right now, not happy with Washington in sort of a generalized way, and feeling, many people even using the words, they could send a message if they voted against Martha Coakley, the Democrat, who is still popular in Massachusetts in her role as Attorney General. So there is a sense that people are using their vote, at least on some level, to send a message, in addition to it being a citizen of Massachusetts electing one of their senators to go to Washington. So people seem very aware of the larger ramifications here. And those that we talk to, and again, these are people who would be willing to talk to a reporter and interested in the race, so factor that in. They are saying that they want this to be an opportunity to send a message and a wake-up call for Democrats. Those are the kinds of sentiments we've been hearing from ordinary voters we've been talking to throughout the day. I guess that may give you a little sense, a snapshot of the moment here politically, Ed.
It does. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell with us tonight here on The Ed Show. Thanks so much, Kelly. Joining me now is Bob Shrum, veteran Democratic strategist and professor at New York University. Is this a classic just throw the bums out? Of course, the proverbial thinking is right now is that, Martha Coakley is behind and Scott Brown's going to win this thing. But judging from the reports all day long, Bob, it seems like it's a throw the bums out mentality, what we're hearing.
Yeah, and that's what everybody's going to interpret this as, some kind of referendum on the president or referendum on health care. There's a famous book written about Massachusetts political campaigns called The Last Hurrah. This book could be called The Worst Hurrah. I mean, you have a candidate who took the election for granted, who waited too long to make a real argument, who said that Kurt Schilling was a Yankees fan, Catholics shouldn't work in emergency rooms. I'm for her, and I hope in these last 2 hours people will go out and vote for her, because she's going to stand with Barack Obama to pass a jobs bill. Scott Brown's going to vote against it. But that's the reality. The president's very popular here, nearly 60% approval. John Kerry is even more popular here. Vicki Kennedy is stratospherically popular. I think a different Democratic candidate and a different Democratic campaign would not have put us in the position that we're probably in tonight.
Bob, how much do you put at the altar of the Obama administration when it comes to shouldering responsibility for not getting health care done, for trying to work with Republicans when they said last July that they wanted it to be his Waterloo, and trying to drag this thing out instead of getting it done and focusing down and nailing this health care bill down? Every legislative agenda has got a shelf life, and maybe people are just tired about waiting for health care reform to the point where they think nothing's going to get done. Do you sense any of that with the voters today in Massachusetts?
Well, you're certainly right about the shelf life. And one of the problems with health care here in Massachusetts was that Scott Brown kept going around saying, look, we all have health care. We have a state health care plan, which, by the way, is quite similar to the one that's before the Congress. So we're just going to pay for other people to have one. And Martha Coakley never got up and said, wait a minute, there are provisions in that bill that give Massachusetts more Medicaid money. So under that bill, we're not only held harmless, we may come out ahead. She never, the health care might have been the elephant in the room. You had to talk about it. You couldn't run away from it. You had to talk about jobs. You couldn't spend all your time talking about abortion and choice.
It's the economy, it's health care, it's the state of the country, all of that. Bob Shrum, does Martha Coakley have a shot at this? Do you believe all the polls? And and I guess this big turnout, would this mean Democrats are just coming out in droves to support Obama?
I think she has a shot. I'd worry about saying that the turnout helps her. The Mayor Menino of Boston just told me that there's a 70% turnout in the town of Carlisle, which is heavily Republican.
Yeah.
I think you may see a lot of Republicans coming out. He said he was going to be the 41st vote against health care to get his Republican base, and then he ran a stylistic campaign to get independents and other people. And when he's out there shaking hands in the cold in front of Fenway Park, and his opponent says, why would you do that? I spend my time talking to politicians. You're going to get into a difficult race. Teddy Kennedy, who was the most popular politician in the history of this state, never took anything for granted.
Yeah.
We'd be riding along in a car. He'd see a car with a Kennedy bumper sticker. He'd say, pull up next to the guy. I want to talk to him. It was a constant effort to communicate with and touch people and to show people that progressive values mattered in their lives, whether it was the minimum wage, children's health care, or helping kids to go to college. That hasn't happened in this campaign.
Bob Shrum, on a lighter note, tonight, I'm sure you're aware I'm number 4 on the GOP most wanted list, and I was just wondering, with your experience, do I get a plaque with this, or is there a wall hanger or anything that goes along with this? Is there something about this award that I don't know, or this poll?
Well, I think you should either get yourself a medal or some kind of button.
Something.
I was in the book 100 People Who Are Destroying America, and I took it as a badge of honor.
Right. Bob Shrum, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed.
You bet. Coming up, Huffington Post founding editor Roy Sekoff will explain how President Obama should fight off the Waterloo crowd for the next 3 years. Plus, a major gun group gives President Obama and the administration an F on all fronts. Background checks, gun trafficking, guns in public, assault weapons, and of course, well, you name it, he gets an F from the gun group. All that plus Psycho Talk, a real primer tonight, the centerfold guy from Massachusetts. I think he's going to give us a lot of material if he gets elected. That's all coming up on The Ed Show. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Ed Show. Now to the latest on Haiti. 1 week after the powerful earthquake that left Haiti's capital city in ruins, the United States military presence there continues to escalate. Helicopters carrying dozens of American soldiers landed on the lawn of Haiti's destroyed presidential palace today. Hundreds of Haitians watched and cheered from outside the palace gates as troops unloaded food and water to distribute among the folks. There are around 4,000 U.S. troops on the ground in Haiti right now, and thousands more are expected to arrive in the next few days. Also, U.S. State Department estimates that several thousand Americans are still missing following the quake. 28 Americans have been confirmed dead, and 4,500 have been evacuated from Haiti. But I want to turn now to a more positive story and a positive note involving relief efforts. The children affected by the quake are the smallest and most vulnerable victims, and saving them obviously is a high priority. This morning, 53 Haitian orphans left homeless by the quake were brought to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with the help of Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell. The U.S. State Department has announced that it is easing the requirements for orphan children to enter the states and be adopted. They have set up an operations center that is solely devoted to granting adoption visas. For more on this, let's turn to Michelle Bond. She works for the United States State Department as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Overseas Citizen Services. Well, this has been quite a story. It tears your heart apart when you see these kids wandering the street, the videotape that is coming out constantly, and they have such a look of bewilderment on their face. Michelle, are we on the fast track when it comes to adoption? Tell us about it.
I'd be happy to, Ed. Thanks. The children that Governor Rendell helped to come to the United States are not children who were orphaned by the quake. They are children who were already on track to be adopted, and they are coming to the United States to join the families that they had been matched to long before the quake. So, and the program that you've described, which was announced last night by Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, Homeland Security Secretary, she announced a program which is going to enable us to assist families who are on track to adopt children from Haiti. We already have a lot of information. We're well along on the adoption process, and that's what's being fast-tracked with the cooperation and agreement of the Haitian government. The program is not designed to move children who may have been orphaned by the quake immediately to the States, because many of those children may have parents who are they've been separated from, and the parents are looking for them. Or they may have lost their parents, but there are other family members who are looking for them.
Tell us about your adoption operations center there.
All right. We have opened up email address and telephone lines that people who are in the process of adopting can get in touch with the State Department or with the Department of Homeland Security in order to make sure that we have all the information about their case. And in the case of children who are already matched, so that we know that the government of Haiti has already said this is an orphan. This is definitely an orphan. We've checked out the background of this child. And the U.S. government and the government of Haiti have also checked out the background of the adopting parents. They've been fingerprinted. They've been checked out by the FBI. They've had a home study. They've had, their backgrounds have been carefully looked at, and they've had time to think seriously about the responsibility of adopting a child. They're ready to complete the process, and that's what the task force is working on, to make arrangements for those children to move as quickly as possible to the States.
And how many total orphans do you estimate will end up here in the United States? Do you have a number or an idea in any way?
We don't have an accurate idea. We know that there are hundreds of them, and we've been hearing from those parents, and this is a very high priority. You mentioned that thousands of American citizens have been evacuated from Haiti in the wake of the quake. It's actually, the latest number I have is over 5,200 who have been evacuated, and I'm sure it's higher by now. But the assistance to these orphans who are going to be the adopted children of American citizens is an equally high priority as our assistance to American American citizens who are being affected by the quake.
Sure. Michelle Bond, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Appreciate your time tonight. From the U.S. State Department, Michelle Bond. Coming up, the man who could fill Ted Kennedy's seat is a fan of waterboarding? Interesting. I'll show you the other side of Scott Brown next in Psycho Talk. Stay with us. And in Psycho Talk tonight, always good to get new people in the club. Massachusetts needs to know what it's going to be getting if this guy Brown becomes the next senator from that state. So I got a Psycho Talk primer for you tonight. All right, let's look at this guy. Back in October 2001, when Brown was a state representative, he voted against a bill to fund Red Cross workers who volunteered at Ground Zero after the September 11th terror attacks. This past weekend, I think Progress asked him about it.
2001, you voted against 9/11 recovery workers, giving them aid. Do you have any comment on that story?
Yes, there was a time when our budget was down. We had a lot of cuts, unfortunately, and we needed to take care of our own priorities first.
Oh, those priorities. You know what Scott Brown prioritized that particular fall? Well, while he was voting against 9/11 rescue workers, he was pushing a bill to build a tax-subsidized golf course. He prioritized a golf course over 9/11 volunteers. And, well, Psycho Talk just keeps coming with this guy. You see, before the 2008 election, he pushed a wingnut theory that President Obama was born out of wedlock.
Barack's mom had him when she was 18 years old.
And married.
Well, I don't know about that.
Folks, that man has no business being in the United States Senate, let alone in Ted Kennedy's old Senate seat. If Scott Brown wins tonight, you can surely expect a lot more of that kind of Psycho Talk. Attention, Massachusetts voters, you got 90 minutes left to vote. Now is not the time to stay home. You have to just get it together and go do what you got to do to fill this Senate seat with somebody who's going to move the country forward. We'll have an update on the turnout. And this race has the Democrats on Capitol Hill scrambling to finish the health care bill. I'll lay out their battle plan next. All that plus a shocking grade for the president's first year in office will be dished out in the playbook dealing with firearms in this country. You're watching The Ed Show on MSNBC. Welcome back to The Ed Show, and thanks for watching tonight. The people of Massachusetts may be the only ones voting today, but make no mistake about it, this race will have national repercussions. If the Republican Scott Brown wins, it's another victory for obstructionist Republicans who have done nothing but stall health care reform all the way back to August. Now, you can look at it this way. Back in August, we heard that health care would pass by mid-October. Then we get to October, and then we're told, well, you know, really, we're going to have it at the president's desk by Christmas. That's what we're going to do. In November, that deadline got pushed back even further. We were told it would might happen around the State of the Union. Well, Obama's State of the Union address, the president will address the nation, slated for January 27th. And it doesn't look like we're going to have a bill by then either. So especially if Scott Brown wins tonight, he'll be the stall mechanism unless the Democrats get on the fast track. For more on what the Massachusetts special election means for health care reform, let me bring in Mike Allen of Politico tonight. Mike, great to have you back with us. It's been a while.
Thanks, Ed.
This is political juice at the max, is it not? Who would have ever thought this scenario would be playing out like this? And I want to ask you, is the Obama administration paying the price for dragging their feet on health care reform and letting this long process draw out over 8 or 9 months instead of getting right to it after the Republicans said, we're going to make it your Waterloo? What about all that?
Well, Ed, you can't overstate the consequences for health care, but you definitely can overstate health care as a cause. Everybody's going to point to the Massachusetts result and say, oh, this is because of the environment, this is because of the president. Proof that that's not the case, proof that this is at least in large part because of the candidate and the campaign, is the fact that just 9 days ago, the front page of the Sunday Boston Globe had her up 15 points. That wouldn't be the case if it was all external factors. So you had a Republican who took advantage of a very terrible environment, and you had a campaign and a candidate that did nothing to protect themselves against tough times.
Well, I think you make a very interesting point, because those last few weeks is now affecting the attitude of Democrats. Listen to Congressman Weiner this morning on Morning Joe. This is amazing to me.
What's the next move if you only have 59 senators?
I think you can make a pretty good argument that health care might be dead.
Really?
Yeah, because I think it's going to be very hard to ask us in the House to take the Senate bill when everyone acknowledges it was a worse bill.
Now, why wasn't he saying that a few weeks ago? I mean, they found the panic button late here, didn't they?
Well, yeah, and there's a little bit of shadow boxing going on here. You know, we're having today, for the first time, leaders indicating that, yes, they maybe could accept the Senate bill if they are promised changes in reconciliation. But I think that may be more laying the groundwork for some concessions to Republicans, scaling back the bill a bit. So I think there's a lot of posturing going on today. These lines in the sand, definitive statements like that, I wouldn't take them as the final answer.
Well, I would take this as a final answer from this guy, Michael Moore, who was on this program some time ago saying that the progressive Democrats in this country are going to come together and go after those Democrats that stood in the way of health care reform. Here he is. Michael, you have gone so far as to put Democrats on notice, saying that you will work against them. You will go into their districts and target them to take them out if they don't represent the people.
I will personally help to organize in any congressional district or in any state where, in the case of a senator, people to find the right candidate in the Democratic primary to run against these individuals and remove them from office.
So the question now, Mike Allen, is in the wake of this Senate race up in Massachusetts tonight, if it doesn't go right, what's the next move for progressives?
Well, I would remind you that when Republicans started to eat each other up, we talked about how it wasn't very smart. I think a lot of people will make that point about Democrats as well. But that soundbite was an indication of the incredible blame game that we're going to see. These are sort of pre-mortems, you might call them, of what's likely to go on tonight. So you have D.C. blaming Boston. You have Boston blaming D.C. You have liberals blaming progressives. You have the more conservative Democrats blaming each other, and you have the Hill blaming the White House and vice versa. So everybody's going to talk about why the alarm was not sounded sooner, why this race was allowed to get out of hand, and why Washington Republicans quietly put $500,000 into this race and got a lot better bang for their buck than the National Democrats, who put in $2.5 million after the barn door was open.
Mike Allen, always a pleasure. Great to have you with us.
Great treat. Thank you for your coverage.
You bet. Chief White House correspondent of Politico, Mike Allen, with us here on The Ed Show. Joining me now, let's go to our panel. Joan Walsh, editor-in-chief, Salon.com, and Ron Christie, former advisor to former Vice President Dick Cheney. All right, Joan, I want to look at it this way, if I can, for just a moment tonight. I think the Democrats are going to pay a severe price for dragging this health care thing out, and I think it's going to fall on the shoulders of the conservative Democrats who crossed every T and dotted every I and really had cold feet when it came to the public option. I'm talking about Kent Conrad, you're looking at Ben Nelson, Blanche Lincoln, Mary Landrieu, and of course Joe Lieberman. Is the White House going to pay a price for foot dragging by the conservative Democrats? What do you think?
Yes, but just a couple of starting points, Ed. First of all, the race is not over, and I do worry about sitting here doing postmortems when people still have to vote in Massachusetts.
True.
So you've already said that. I want to say that again. Second, this is not a race. This is not any kind of referendum on President Obama. It's a referendum on Martha Coakley. President Obama did not tell her to go on vacation. President Obama did not tell her to mock going to Fenway Park, which is a landmark. It's a holy place in Massachusetts. She ran a terrible campaign. Okay, got that out of the way. Having said that, There will be national implications, and I'm not sure what they are. I do agree with you. The president made a terrible mistake turning health care reform over to the Senate Finance Committee, which meant over to Chuck Grassley, really. He courted Republicans. He courted Olympia Snowe. He didn't get one damn vote. That will prove to be a mistake. We can say that now. However, people who are talking about blocking health care reform, and Michael Moore is going to go out and campaign against conservative Blue Dog Democrats. I'm sorry, Ed, we don't like it, but we don't have a majority without some Blue Dog Democrats. That's where we are. Michael Moore makes great movies. He doesn't organize. A lot of the people who are the shrill people on the left, I love them. Sometimes I'm one of them. They don't organize. That's why we're here. So I want to see a health care reform bill passed. That's going to make me very unpopular among progressives, but I think they've got to do it. If they have to take the Senate bill, they have to take the Senate bill. That's what's going to happen, I hope. Otherwise, all hell will break loose for Barack Obama.
Ron Christie, is this a referendum on President Obama? What do you think?
Of course this is a referendum on President Obama, but it goes beyond President Obama. It's the congressional leadership. I think the American people, we take 1 year ago, we had a very exciting inauguration for a brand new president, hope and change, and they were going to change the tone in Washington. I think Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, probably the two central figures in this, arrogantly tried to jam through an agenda that the American people weren't ready for. The president would have been well wise to have taken not only the global climate change issue off the table, but to sat down very constructively with Republicans and Democrats and said, let's craft something for the American people. President Obama inherited, there's no question, a recession when he came into office, Ed. But more than 2 million Americans lost their jobs over this past year.
Okay, but Ron, this is the political wild card here. What has Scott Brown or the Republicans done to garnish all this polling goodwill from independent voters in Massachusetts? Are they gaining ground by default? What's happening?
No, I think they're gaining traction. Scott Brown has gone out and said that he does not want to vote for this health care bill in its current fashion. He does not want to vote for global climate change. He does not believe in one-party rule in Washington, and that he wants to roll up his sleeves and reach across the aisle very constructively to work with Republicans and Democrats.
Well, he would be the first one to do that.
It's not going to happen.
Well, but again,
the first one
Joan,
to do it.
I tell you what, this is why I think the Democrats have a very good opportunity. If you look at Bill Clinton when he lost control of the House back in the mid-1990s, he was able to craft a very successful second term. I think President Obama and congressional Democrats would be wise right now to read the mood of the American people, not to overreach in their agenda, to reach out constructively in a bipartisan manner, and I think they can get health care and a lot of the other issues the president wants.
All right.
But you know, Ron, but you know, the Obama did reach out to Republicans to craft the stimulus bill, and he still didn't get any votes. He started this year very much in the spirit of I did campaign on setting a new tone in Washington. He invited them to the White House. He took their ideas on the stimulus, and he didn't get any votes. He did the same thing with health care reform. They rammed through all these amendments. They voted for their amendments, and then they didn't vote for the bill. There's been plenty of bipartisan conversation about both the economy and health care reform, but when push comes to shove, Republicans won't vote for anything Barack Obama wants. So why should he compromise?
Ron, how are you supposed to work with the other party when longtime Senator Jim DeMint says he wants to break the president? He wants it to be his Waterloo. Now, is that a starting point for bipartisanship? And then this party is garnishing the goodwill of independent voters in Massachusetts. I don't get what the upside is. I don't get what they've done other than stand in the way.
Well, I think Jim DeMint was absolutely right that health care would be President Obama's Waterloo. Listen, if you look at the way that the demonization that took place with President Bush over the last 8 years about how people were saying that they wanted the president to fail, saying far worse things about the war in Iraq.
Who said that? Who said that? Rush Limbaugh said that about Obama.
And yet and still, in the first year of the Bush term, 9 years ago, he was able to work with Ted Kennedy. He was able to work with George Miller from California. He had very significant bipartisan, he had very significant bipartisan support. I think the difference is, rather than saying, let's come to a couple of meetings, President Bush sat down very constructively with Democrats in his first term in office. President Obama made a few token gestures of having a meeting. I think the American people tonight, Ed, are sending a very clear message. They want people in Washington to meet. They want the bickering to stop, and they want the jobs to start coming. And that has to be done on both sides of the aisle.
Well, and it's interesting how you're spinning that, Ron. I don't know how. I mean, it is the economy is the #1 issue.
That's right.
Up in Massachusetts with an 8% unemployment unemployment.
But
Joan
Democrats are talking about health care, Ed, and I think that's why we're
The
here.
Democrats are talking about health care, but they're also talking about jobs and freeing up money through the community banks to break out lending for small businesses to create jobs. It takes time to do that. When Obama came in, we were losing 750,000 jobs a month. Now that number has been cut down to less than 100,000. But let me ask you about the economy. Joan Walsh, are the American people, are we just impatient? We want jobs and we want them now, and no matter who's in there would pay the price.
Yes, we are impatient. And again, I do go back to your point, Ed, about Obama having taken too long to get this through. I completely disagree with Ron, obviously. I almost always do. He should have pushed this through harder, left the Republicans alone once they told him they didn't want to work with him, and then we would be on to jobs. Then we'd be on to either a second stimulus or else other kinds of job creation and tax credits, et cetera. So he has wound up kind of standing in cement of his own pouring by letting the Republicans dictate his agenda and the timing of his agenda. We need to get on to jobs, and we are impatient, but, you know, the people who are out of work are impatient for a reason.
Joan Walsh, Ron Christie, great to have you with us tonight. Great discussion. Thanks so much. Coming up, ammunition is flying off the store shelves, and people are bringing loaded guns to public events like presidential rallies. That's what's happened this year. Now, one of America's largest gun control groups is calling on the president to do something about it. That's next in my playbook. Stay with us. And in my playbook tonight, President Obama just received a failing grade on his first year in office from the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence. The group has blasted the president, who they endorsed in the 2008 campaign, for not having taken significant steps to advance gun control laws in this country. Joining me now for more on this is Paul Helmke. He's the president of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence. Mr. Helmke is also the former mayor of Fort Wayne, Indiana, so he can speak with experience on what it's like from a law enforcement perspective. Mr. Helmke, an F? President Obama gets an F on gun control laws? What's happening here?
It was a very disappointing year, Ed. Candidate Obama said a lot of the right things. Candidate Obama talked about how hunters can have their guns, but we don't need assault weapons on the streets of Cleveland. He talked about that in his convention speech. He talked about trying to find middle ground to protect gun rights, but also to make it harder for dangerous people to get guns. But since he's been in office, it's like they don't even know what the word gun is anymore. He not only didn't push good legislation that he said he supported, he actually signed into law two things that help more guns get to more places, which is bad. And most disappointing, after we had some of the tragedies in this country, the shootings of police officers in Pittsburgh and Oakland and in Washington State, the shooting of people in Binghamton, New York, at the health club outside of Pittsburgh, Fort Hood, he never talked about guns. 400 students shot in his hometown of Chicago last year, and they don't even talk about school violence until somebody's killed with a 2x4. They tried to run away from the word gun and the issue altogether.
What did you expect in his first year? I mean, this is always a political hot potato, especially for a Democratic president.
It's a hot potato, but he handled it perfectly during the campaign. In fact, I think the NRA ran ads against him in 13 states. He carried 11 of those. His message on common sense gun control in the middle worked with the public, worked with the electorate.
So what do you want him to do?
But he didn't talk. I'd like him to do what he said he was going to do. I'd like him to support efforts to close the gun show loophole, to require background checks for those who are buying guns, to make sure
we have that now?
Not only if you buy from a federally licensed dealer, but if you go to almost any gun show in almost any state and find the right table, you can buy as many guns as you want without a background check.
The last time I bought a deer rifle, I couldn't take it off the shelf. I had to wait a few days.
Well, hey, most places, Ed, no waiting period. And again, if you go to the right table at the right gun show, no background check at all in this country.
Okay, so you want him to do the background check. And you also made reference to his hometown of Chicago having more gun violence this year. Is that a fact?
They've been seeing more gun violence in Chicago, yes.
So, a failing grade. Have you had any response from the White House? Have you tried to meet with the president on gun violence?
Yes, we've been trying to talk to the president. I think they're taking the political position that they don't want to talk about this, even though they campaigned on it, even though most of the American people support it, even though most NRA members and gun owners support these kind of common sense things. I think they're learning that avoiding these issues doesn't work. 30,000 people continue to die in this country each year from guns. 80,000 people are injured each year in this country from guns. Something needs to be done, and keeping silent isn't making the country any safer.
Well, the proponents of gun usage, so to speak, sportsmen, whatever, ammunition is flying off the shelves in this country because they thought that President Obama was going to be a gun grabber, and it turns out that you're giving him a grade of F on the other side of the ledger. Mr. Helmke, appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much.
We're hopeful he'll do better in the future. Thanks.
Okay, coming up, no one can fill Ted Kennedy's shoes. But by the end of this night, the Bay State will have chosen someone to fill his seat. The founding editor of the Huffington Post will explain what this means to each and every American. That's next on The Ed Show. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Ed Show. We're getting closer to finding out if the Democrats will hold on to the seat that Ted Kennedy held for 40-some-odd years, 46 years. If Massachusetts will elect its first Republican senator since 1972. The polls close in just over an hour. Let me bring in founding editor of the Huffington Post, Roy Sekoff. Roy, apparently heavy turnout. What do you make of it?
Well, Ed, you know, either way, actually, this goes, either if it's a close win for Coakley or if she loses, to me, this is the political equivalent of a mild heart attack for the Democrats and for Obama. It's not fatal, but it's enough to send him to the ER and have the doctor say, listen, you got to change your ways. So the real question is, what message does the White House take away from this? And we're already hearing some talk, you know, from the likes of Joe Lieberman saying, well, this is a message that he's got to move to the center and go back to the bipartisanship and go back to courting Olympia Snow and all that, which I think would be a very big mistake for the Democrats, playing right into the hands of the GOP. On the other hand, what I think he needs to do is use it as a wake-up call to say, I need to get back to what I ran on. I need to get back to trying to push through real reform, the things that people voted for me to do, and not this being in bed so cozy with Wall Street and the big banks.
Well, speaking of heart attacks, this is what the political EKG machine says tonight. In a number of polls, you've got Brown leading. Daily Kos has got him tied. Suffolk 7 News, American Research Group, and Politico have got him up 4, 7, and 9. And also Political Insider Advantage, Politico, Brown up by 9, 52-43. Then the Suffolk 7 poll, as I said, 50-46. The only poll where they're tied is Daily Kos Research 2000. They are tied there at 48. Now, polling today is pretty close. I'm interested in your opinion as to where in the polling why have the independents swung so strongly to Brown? What's happening out there to garnish that favor? I'm puzzled by that.
Really? I think, Ed, that the Coakley's, pollster gave an interview to the Huffington Post today, and I think she spoke truth when she said that the White House has not been strong enough on the way they stand with Wall Street and the way they stand with the banks, and the independents are angry. And because they've been tone deaf about the foreclosures and they've been tone deaf about the unemployment, I think, in the way they've responded to it, I think that the independent voters are angry, and they've allowed this vacuum, and the populist anger has now been able to turn on Democrats. And they've become the status quo, Ed. That's the problem. They're giving a lot of the rhetoric about fighting for the middle class and about all that kind of stuff, Main Street. But that's not what we're seeing, Ed. What we're seeing is time and time again is a retrenchment and a playing right into the hands of Wall Street and right into the hands of the big banks. And that's not where you want to be heading into 2010 is, cozying up, with the bankers and with Wall Street.
Roy Sekoff, great to have you with us again tonight. Thanks for your insight on this. For an update on voter turnout, let me bring in someone who is boots on the ground in Massachusetts. Radio talk show host Jeff Santos at WWZN in Boston. Jeff, is there populist anger out there that's showing up at the polls? What do you think?
Yeah, there is, and then that's the difference. But it's not that. The fact is there's change is in the air, and they want to have change, and they look at Scott Brown as phony change. The fact is that Martha Coakley is the continuation of change. It started in 2006 here in Massachusetts with Deval Patrick, 2008 with Barack Obama, and it needs to continue tonight. And if we can get out the vote, it will. That's the difference. People want change. They're suffering in unemployment, 10% unemployment. They're suffering because they want more health care. The reason why it's only 36% pro-health care in this state is because they want the public option, which reduces the cost. That's the only way you're going to do it. You've been fighting for it all the time on the radio and TV. You get it. That's why it's down.
So you think
that's why we need to bring it up.
You think the Democrats giving up on the public option has dwindled their numbers?
No doubt about it. There's obviously some folks that don't want to do it, but that's the loony right. But there are a lot of progressives who really want the public option because, look, everybody has to have health care in this state. When you look at your bill and it's $500, $700 for a 50-year-old single woman who may have a pre-existing condition, $800 a month. That's what they want.
So, Jeff, why would that issue, in your opinion, turn that to a Republican who says he wants to be the 41st vote? I mean, are they that upset about the bill that they don't want any reform at all?
I think they're two separate things. I think they're jobs, and I think that's where a lot of the independents are. They're unemployed. They're looking to try to find out where they can go for change because they feel whatever change they can find. A lot of people think that Coakley was the incumbent. She was the favorite. She was the attorney general. They don't know the difference between attorney general, Senate, governor. They just look at her as she's been in office. So Brown's the outsider. He's run a good campaign from that perspective.
Who's going to win this thing? Make a call.
I think Coakley by 1.
You think Coakley by 1? All right. That wouldn't be Kurt Schilling's vote, would it?
No. We're Pedro Martinez guys on this side.
All right. Good to have
He's
you
a
with
Democrat.
us, Jeff. Thank you. All right. Tonight in our televote survey, I asked, do you think today's election in Massachusetts is a referendum on President Obama? 65% of you said yes. 35% said no. That's The Ed Show. I'm Ed Schultz. For more information on The Ed Show, go to ed.msnbc.com or our radio website, wegoted.com. Chris Matthews is next with Hardball right here on MSNBC. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Political Super Bowl up in Boston. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews at Doyle's Cafe up in Boston, leading off tonight for Obama Healthcare. It's Final Jeopardy tonight. We're just 1 hour away from the polls closing here in Massachusetts, where voters are deciding the fate of the late Ted Kennedy Senate seat and whether President Obama has the necessary 60 Senate votes to pass national health care. It's that rare election where voters know exactly what they're voting on. If they vote for Democrat Martha Coakley, they get the health care reform they want. If they go for Republican Scott Brown, it's deliberate, premeditated murder for health care. This race has Republican Scott Brown right now threatening to pull off the biggest political upset of our time. A Democratic defeat could not only put us on the end to health care, but it would threaten and to weaken President Obama's standing nationally, send Democrats running for cover, and also perhaps provide a path to victory for other Republicans around the country hoping to knock off Democrats. Tonight, we'll get to why this race got down to the wire and what it means for the president's agenda looking forward and the midterms this November. Let's start with a look at pollster.com's trend line. It shows how all the polls put together have shown now that Republican Scott Brown is pulling away with a 9-point spread there in the composite polling. With me now, NBC News Chief White House correspondent Chuck Todd, and also Democratic strategist, our friend Bob Shrum, who's with me here at Doyle's Cafe. Let's go to the White House. But I have a sense that this is a national election, that there's a seismic impact coming out of this thing. Chuck Todd.
Hurricane terms. I grew up in South Florida, so I think this way. And the question is, how big of a political storm is this going to be? How are congressional Democrats going to wake up in the morning? The expectations from these guys is this. There's going to be lots of hyperventilating over the next 48 hours. And they believe that they've got to work through sort of soothing, calming Democrats down on Capitol Hill in the next 48 hours. The question is, how will these congressional Democrats respond to the president, assuming, of course, there is a Brown victory, and the president's response tomorrow, at some point tomorrow he's going to respond. How will congressional Democrats respond to that, right? You know, that'll be sort of step 2 in trying to see if they can prevent a full-scale circular firing squad. We're seeing it now, death by blind quote. Bob's familiar with the way this can work sometimes, where everybody wants to take their shots at these guys, not by picking up the phone and complaining to Rahm or Axe or Gibbs, but by calling one of us up and complaining about them so that we print it or talk about it on TV. They got to withstand that storm surge of sorts and then see where things stand on Thursday or Friday.
Well, Bob, if whatever happens tonight, there will be an objective reality. What I love about politics is one side wins, the other side loses. If the Democrat loses in Massachusetts, everybody who picks up a paper tomorrow or watches television late tonight when we give them the results is going to say it's a loss for health care, it's a loss for the Democrat, because this guy, this attractive candidate, Scott Brown, said, if I get elected, I'm going to kill health care.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's a loss for Democrats. I don't think it's a loss for the president. It's not a repudiation of them. Republicans,
though, are of health care.
Well, I don't agree with
well, he says it is.
I know he does, and Martha Coakley never fought back. She never got up and said the health care bill actually helps Massachusetts because of what it does on Medicaid funding. She let him give the sense that Massachusetts already has health care, so why would we want to pay for other people? The state is not a net loser under this bill. But she never explained that. Beyond that, look, Republicans are a lot better at handling this kind of thing, and you've seen it. You and I both saw it in the early 80s, than Democrats. Ronald Reagan was at 35% approval in January of 83. Reaganomics in 82 was 2-to-1 unpopular in the country. He just pushed ahead. When the economy recovered, he got the benefit, got reelected in the landslide. George W. Bush, the Medicare benefit under Social Security, under the prescription drug benefit under Medicare.
Yeah.
Only 19% of people over 55 supported that at the time. Today, he pushed it through. Today, if you tried to touch it, it would be political suicide. So if Democrats walk away from health care, they're going to get all the downsides of having been for it, and none of the downsides of people actually getting benefits
we're up
from
here
it.
at Doyle's Pub, one of the real political hangouts around this town and around this state. Let's look at this number, because I've been hearing this in the feeling of the people up here. I think Massachusetts is very much in sync with our new NBC poll that just came out tonight. Let's look at these numbers quickly. They're basically no surprise to anybody who watches this show. The president's doing okay in terms of general approval. He's not in the toilet or anything. He's at 48-43. Not great, not terrible. About mezza, as you might say in Italian up here, right? Okay, let's take a look at some other stuff here. You know, it's not terrible, these numbers. Basically, approve, disapprove is 48-43. Then you go to the question of, do they like him personally? Whoa, 75% in the latest poll today like this guy. You wouldn't know it from some of the talk. 75% like the president. But 44%, Chuck, you're going, don't approve of his pop. 44% approve. But then you go running down the list, and this is such an interesting thing to look at, this one sheet. It shows they like his family, they like him as a person, they like him as a leader even. It begins to fade. It goes across the 50-yard line here. Presenting U.S. abroad, okay, but not so much as commander-in-chief. They may think he's not tough enough. And then we get down to issues, 41%. Chuck, the president's still popular. If he loses in Massachusetts tonight, he's got to take that personal popularity and he's got to translate that to some kind of reset. Something that says, okay, I'm not too big for my britches. Right. I came in here with too much song and dance, too much, hubris. I'm going to readjust to reality now. I just took a licking up in Massachusetts. Or he's going to say, Coakley ran a terrible campaign. It's not my problem. What do you think he's going to say?
I think he's going to say both things. I mean, that's what I've heard from inside the White House a little bit. Because the fact is, Coakley did run a terrible campaign. A good campaign in this environment in Massachusetts should have won. It wouldn't have been easy, let's be honest. Scott Brown turned out to be a very good candidate. I think they underestimated him personally. When they turned the spotlight on both of them, he performed, she didn't. But the fact is, it was still not a good political environment. It's not like Obama has 80% job approval in a blue state like Massachusetts. It's sitting in the low to mid 50s at best, which is a little bit higher than his national average, but not there. But this personal popularity is important. I want to pick up on the Reagan point that Bob made, and that is Reagan had the same thing going for him. What it gives you is room with the public. The public still trusts Obama. They still like the guy, which means they'll still listen to him. He has an opportunity opportunity to say what you just said, retool. They're not going to pull a Dick Morris and say and repudiate what he did, but they're going to say, look, I hear you. You're right. This fight for health care makes it seem like you don't think I'm fighting for you on the economy. But you know what? I am, and here's how. That's the type of message that they want to put front and center, State of the Union and going forward.
But I think they have, well, I'm not going to give them advice, but yes, I will.
Sure, go ahead.
They got to act like they hear the people. Voting matters.
Correct.
That's how he got elected president. You have to respect the voter. And Barack Obama, the president of the United States, as high up as he is, has got to say, what matters in this country is democracy. The people speak. I listen. I've got to take into account. They don't. You say they haven't heard the right message about health care. But what they heard, they don't like, because this guy, this Republican says, I'm going to go in there and kill it. And they say, perhaps tonight we'll see. Okay, go kill it.
Two things. First, if he retreats, if he goes to a Clinton line, if he retreats,
goes back to school uniforms.
If he retreats, goes back to school uniforms, small size issues, triangulation. I think his presidency is in deep trouble. I don't think he's going to do that. I think he's going to do what Reagan did. He's going to push ahead, and as this economy gets better, the Democratic Party's going to get better. And by the way, those guys in Congress better understand they need to stand with him to get this done. Second, on Chuck's point, this was a classically terrible campaign. It will go down in the books. The famous book up here about politics is The Last Hurrah. This was the worst hurrah.
They're talking to the guy talking right now knows the stuff. Teddy Kennedy up here, born to such tremendous advantage in life, was a hard-working politician who went out and shook every hand he could do, did everything he could, hung out with people, and actually liked their company. I think, Chuck, this president comes off a bit too cool. I would say people up here will say that the candidate up here, Martha Coakley, came off even cooler than that. The people want a little sense of embrace, a little sense of, I enjoy your company. Let's spend some time together while I listen to you.
And that's what's sad about Coakley. When you talk to people that know her very well, they sit there and say, you know what, she actually came from a hardscrabble background. This isn't somebody who was born into the elite. She really wasn't part of the Massachusetts Democratic machine, but she didn't sell those points. She never talked about it in the general election. I couldn't believe this memo that was written by one of her chief strategists who said, well, they didn't have enough money for early advertising and early polling after the primary. Are you kidding me? You're the supposed senator in waiting from Massachusetts, not a small, insignificant state, somebody who might be seen as somebody holding that seat for 20 years. You couldn't figure out how to raise money? That is just beyond campaign malpractice.
Well, you ought to wait till you lose before you become a sore loser. What do you think? Anyway,
well,
Chuck
that's
Todd,
another one.
you,
I couldn't believe she wrote that memo then already. Wait till tomorrow.
Well,
it's insane. It's insane.
Well,
Chris is right. You wait.
I'm already hearing voter irregularities. What is this, Tehran? Anyway, coming up, this is a national election here in Massachusetts, but what's going on out there that made this so close a race? My hunch, the guy said, I don't like health care. I'm going to vote against it. Vote for me. We'll see how the people vote tonight. That may be the key, what people heard and what they did. We're back in a moment at Doyle's Cafe in Boston, the heart of Massachusetts politics. Polls in Massachusetts close in less than an hour now. You're watching Hardball, only on MSNBC. Welcome back to Hardball. So what happened on the ground up here in Massachusetts that made this race so close, perhaps made it an upset of the century? Sam Alice is with the Boston Globe, and David Paleologos is with the Suffolk University polling operation. David, there's already complaints coming out of the Democratic campaign up here that they didn't take enough early polls, and that's why they lost. They haven't even lost, but they're already talking about why they might have lost.
Polling is really important, and this is something that should never have gotten away from either campaign. I mean, the issues were clear: economy and jobs, health care. They knew what they needed to do.
Well, how
so
did a
no
Democrat
excuses.
go from 30 points ahead to what could be an upset defeat tonight?
A combination of anti-establishment, a combination of health care and jobs, combination of a lot of scandal locally, combination of anti-Deval Patrick, anti-Harry Reid, and President Obama.
But you know, Sam, you write a column, you write for the Globe here. You knew all that 3 months ago. You knew the Democrats weren't popular. You knew health care was a tough sell. You knew the economy was in terrible shape. You knew the governor wasn't popular. Why didn't the candidate know all these things?
That's what everyone's going to be asking. You know, I mean, this will be a case study taught in both parties as to how not to run a campaign. I feel sorry for her, too. I mean, this is not what hit her. I mean, she's not, as I said, she's a lawyer. She's not a politician. She's not used to doing this. She's not comfortable campaigning. The elemental stuff you got to do to get elected. She wanted to be senator, but she wasn't wild over what you have to do to get there.
There's something in the water up here, guys, where the politicians you tend to like, not the Kennedys, but some of the other ones that seem so academic and elite that they don't know what regular people are like. Like, why did Dukakis get in the tank? David, why did he put the helmet, the Rocky the Squirrel helmet on? Well, why did they, because it said please wear a helmet if you're in the tank? Why are they so dutiful and official?
It might have been a poll driven. It might have been poll driven.
Why do you guys up here do this stuff?
You know,
why didn't she know who Kurt Schilling, the great pitcher for the Sox, was? Why would she not know who he was?
Well, what happens is you prepare for everything that you think is coming at you, and you know you can't know all things about all issues.
You can't know who the local team.
Boston,
excuse me, Sam. The Boston Red Sox. It's unlike any other sport, and it's unlike any other team.
It's a religion.
It's a religion up here. You got to buy into it or move somewhere else.
Right.
So how do you live here and not know who the pitchers are for the Sox?
She has never entered her mind, that whole world. That said, I think the media's gone way overboard.
Wait a minute, you get the newspaper, the sports page sort of falls out of the paper.
She doesn't read the sports page. She doesn't do it. That's not what she does.
Does she read the Irish sports page, the obits?
No, I don't think she's big on sports. But,
okay, I don't want to trivialize it because it's important to the country.
Right.
Let me ask you about your polling, because you've been on top of the polling here. Do the voters, when they go to vote today, know that if they vote Republican, they're voting to kill health care?
The voters know that.
Do they know that?
Yes, and the voters know that they're dissatisfied. 51% in our statewide poll indicated that they do not approve of near universal health care. At the federal
But don't you have health care in Massachusetts?
They approved the Massachusetts plan, even though 61% said that we couldn't afford it. So there's a marked difference between what we have and what people are comfortable with and what is being proposed.
What struck me, the New York Times report yesterday said that among the people who like President Obama, the Democratic candidate for the Senate up here is losing. How can that be?
You know, I think, too, I mentioned it earlier, that she practiced this strategy of inevitability early and left people thinking that their votes were meaningless. You know, Mondale did it, Hillary Clinton did it, and it was a disaster for both of them. Once you tell someone it's already over and your vote doesn't count, what do you expect them to say? Watch this. And you superimpose that on the watch this, which is going on nationally against Obama with his policies, and it's deadly. It's deadly.
So what's the message for future politicians in this country, David? You're polling.
Well, I mean,
you have the polling information. They say they lost because they didn't have it. What do you know about voter mentality in this country right now that anybody who wants to run for office this November ought to know? What is that?
There is connectivity with every other state. And with the dynamics that we saw, and we polled them in Virginia and New Jersey and now in Massachusetts, will be a national phenomenon.
What are the basics?
Well, the basics are the emotional issue, the basics are the economy and health care, and whether or not they feel that the Obama administration is performing.
Do they have a sense that he's further left than they voted for?
I don't think it's further left or right.
What is it that they got that they didn't want?
Even the Obama rally, I'm not going to be one of those pollsters who, if this lead widens tonight, and it's a big victory, I'm not going to be one of those people that says it was Obama's fault, because in those bellwether communities that we tracked, the lead was already widening.
But I'm asking you, if you're a Democrat in Washington, if you're David Axelrod, if you're Barack Obama, Rahm Emanuel, you're Harry Reid, you're Mitch McConnell, give me one bit of advice that comes out of this polling and what happens here tonight?
Reconnect with your constituency internally in Congress. They have to reach across the aisle now, and they have to go for true bipartisanship to get laws enacted.
David Paleologos, great guy. You've done great campaign. Thanks for calling me back when I call you with questions. You've been great. Sam Allison, thank you. Andy Hillard, thank you too, up here for helping me with the inside information. And thank you as always, Sam Allison. I learned from the regulars, from the real people. We'll be right back from Doyle's Cafe in Boston. Polls in Massachusetts due to close in less than 40 minutes. You're watching Hardball, only on MSNBC. We're back with Hardball at Doyle's Pub in Boston right now. The polls will be closed now in that Senate race here in Massachusetts in just under 40 minutes right now. And we'll begin to find out whether President Obama's health care bill is dead or alive. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell's with us from that famous Cheers bar in Boston. Kelly, you belong there. It's great to be with you up here in Massachusetts. Kelly, give us your take on. Yeah, I know. Give us a report on what's going on and what you smell in the last couple of hours.
Well, it's really been interesting to watch this from Boston and the area around here talking to voters, because you get a real sense of a couple different camps. You have some Democrats very defensive about Martha Coakley and the fact that they believe a Democrat should succeed Ted Kennedy and finish the term he could not. So they are telling us that the get-out-the-vote operation for Democrats is still a machine to be reckoned with. Now, balance that against a lot of anecdotal experience we've had here, talking to voters, bumping into people walking by us here saying they're excited about Scott Brown. He's attracted enthusiasm. People have turned out to see him, meet him, shake his hands. And we really got a sense that there are voters here who remind me of when I've been in Iowa or New Hampshire with you, Chris, where voters know that what they do in their state could have big repercussions. And Massachusetts usually doesn't get to play that kind of role. So they've been talking about sending a message, being frustrated with what has been going on in Washington, talking to people who say, Congress doesn't get it, Washington doesn't get it, and maybe by sending someone new and someone unexpected to Washington, that could shake things up. So you get a real feeling that people are very invested here, whether they want to see the Democrats hold on to it or they're ready to try and shake things up. It's been really fascinating and quite different than a lot of the other races I've covered over the years, Chris.
Kelly, I've done a lot of discussion in the last hour and a half about the negative feelings up here towards the economy, towards the health care bill, to some extent towards the president's policies. But what's the likability factor of this Republican? People, what do you think? What's the positive piece of his candidacy?
Well, when people are getting to know Scott Brown, one way you can judge that is by watching the TV ads. Now, I'd seen all of the ads before coming back to Massachusetts to cover this, but to watch them as a voter or viewer does is a different experience. They fill the airwaves. So, Scott Brown's ads were much more easygoing, regular guy kind of thing. He has used his truck with 200,000 miles on it as a sort of metaphor for being a regular guy who understands the struggles of working people today. And so that has been a symbol that sort of caught on. Now, Martha Coakley and Democrats, in terms of the big national operation, took a different tack. They had first a very direct-to-camera ad from Vicki Kennedy, who is enormously popular here. And then separate from that, negative ads attacking Brown as being in, quote, lockstep with Republicans in Washington. So a very different mood just from the ads. And on the street, people have been excited. Scott Brown has a sort of natural political skill. Martha Coakley, a trained attorney, sort of comes off in a lawyerly fashion in the way she argues her candidacy and the way she interacts with people. It has a bit more of a detached style. Again, she's popular here as Attorney General. It's just this race where people have a different sort of gut check experience. And the comment she made on a radio show where she referred to Curt Schilling, who is a beloved figure here for Red Sox fans who remember what he did in the World Series. She referred to him as a Yankee fan, and that's one of those moments that people generally see as tone deaf. Now, women don't, I'm not a big sports fan, but I know politically that's important when you're running for an office in a state that loves its sports. So that's the kind of thing that just put people off. And so you've got these just different gut level experiences, and the two candidates are quite different. Chris?
Thank you. It's a great, rich report. Thank you, Kelly O'Donnell. Cheers, a real landmark here in Boston. Let's bring in the Politico's Jonathan Martin. We're at another landmark over here, over here in Jamaica Plain. What's your sense of this? She hit all the buttons, I think, Kelly.
Yeah. You know, I was so struck, Chris, coming up here on Friday. I was with Scott Brown, Rudy Giuliani in Boston's North End, as you know, heavily Italian area where somebody like Giuliani is an icon. Walking around for an hour, working the shops, working the cafes, as many folks asked for Brown's autograph as they did for Rudy. He has really struck a chord in this state. He's got this ad showing him driving around in the truck. This other ad, though, very important too, showing him in South Boston, walking around, talking to folks. This real sort of man of the people campaign style has really played well. And there's a sense in this state where it's just, by the way, not overwhelmingly liberal. It's Democratic leaning. A lot of independents here, though. They like this guy. And as you know, Chris, in politics, that goes a long way.
Does he have a hot hand politically enough to run for the nomination for president next time he wins tonight?
I think that's probably a bridge too far.
You think?
For 2012? I think so. Yeah, I think so. But look, the fact that he's going to be perhaps a U.S. senator is phenomenal. This is a guy who's a state senator from a Boston exurb who 2 months ago nobody in national politics had even heard of. He's going to fill Ted Kennedy's seat, perhaps. It's quite an achievement.
Do you think he's headed towards a leadership position in the Senate if he wins? Will he be a major factor in Washington right off the bat?
I think it's too early to say what he would be, but I think clearly
can he match Mitch McConnell and charisma?
Look, he's got man on the street.
Boehner.
He's got man on the street appeal. He's very Massachusetts, too. He's the kind of candidate that plays well in this state. He's a guy that can go to Fenway and shake hands out there for a while. And that sort of a candidate itself. Politics, Chris, as you know, is more simple.
Okay,
I think.
You know what I think? I love picking him. If this guy wins tonight, it's a very, very slow field in the Republican right end. He could go right to the top.
Well, you heard it here first.
And he could be a contestant for the nomination next time. They need somebody strong to run against Barack Obama. Somebody with charisma. They don't have one until this guy shows something. They don't have one yet. Anyway, I'm always looking for winners in the future in either party. Thank you, Jonathan Martin. Serious business, by the way. It's not just about who you like in politics or who's got it, the charisma stuff. It's about health care. And tonight it's on the line here in Massachusetts. And it could be a sad night for those who want health care. It could be a tragic night. Up next, how were Republicans able to harness the anger of voters here in Massachusetts so quickly? How did they become the out party so quickly that they could exploit the anger of the outsider against the establishment? And will it work around the country? Polls closing here in Massachusetts at the end of this hour. It's coming up. The big news of the night. You're watching Hardball, only on MSNBC.
I'm Kristen Welker. We'll get back to our continuing coverage of the Massachusetts election in just a minute. But first, some other important stories making news today. The State Department has raised the American death toll in Haiti to 28. Officials expect that number to continue to climb. There were more than 45,000 Americans in Haiti at the time of the quake. But another rescue today, a full week after that deadly quake. A Mexican rescue team pulled an elderly Haitian woman alive from the ruins of a church residence. Meantime, back here at home, a rare tornado warning for Los Angeles and Orange counties. A series of winter storms are moving through central and southern California, bringing high winds and waves and the threat of flooding and mudslides. And the manufacturer is recalling more than 635,000 cribs after one was linked to an infant death in Iowa. The cribs made by Durrell Asia reportedly have life-threatening problems with their drop sides and slats. Now back to Hardball.
Welcome back to Hardball from Doyle's Cafe in Boston, where if you look at the front page of today's Boston Herald, it's all about mass hysteria, this big race between Democrat Martha Coakley and Republican, what's his name? I'm sorry, Republican Scott Brown. Anyway, Eugene Robinson's Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst, and Pat Buchanan's an MSNBC political analyst. Patrick Buchanan, his name escaped me, but it will be a big name perhaps tomorrow. Scott Brown, Republican, if he pulls an upset here in Massachusetts. Your thoughts about its significance?
I think it's enormously significant, Chris, and I agree with what you were saying earlier. Look, this fellow, Scott Brown, came out and said, I'm going to go to Washington and I'm going to drive a stake right through the heart of Obama's health care plan. Ever since then, he has been surging from slightly behind to 4, 6, or 9 points ahead, despite hundreds of thousands of dollars poured in for Coakley, a waked-up party, Clinton, Kennedy's, and Obama coming in. I think this is a real referendum on health care reform, not only locally or in Massachusetts, but nationally, because I've never seen people around the country so excited or interested in a state race.
Is this a victory if he wins for the Republican Party or for the Tea Party?
I think it's a victory because this fellow is a protest voter, Chris. He's against Obama's health care plan. He's against the establishment. He's an outsider. He doesn't run as a Republican. Clearly, the Republicans will claim a victory, and they'll have a right to. But I think this is anti-Washington, anti-establishment.
Wow. Let me go right now to Gene Robinson in the same question. Is this a victory for if he wins? If he wins, is this a victory for the Republican Party or the Tea Party?
I would agree with Pat's analysis that it's almost more a victory for the Tea Party than the Republican Party, in that this is not an establishment Republican figure. But, let's put it in perspective. I think this would be a very important result and would cause a lot of people in Washington to recalibrate. But if he wins and Coakley loses tomorrow morning, the Republicans will have 41 votes in the Senate and the Democrats will have 59. So, it's not as if there won't still be a Democratic majority. It's not filibuster proof, and they'll have to find different ways to get their legislation passed. But the sort of the apocalypse is I think not upon the Democratic Party, just on the basis of what we expect the result to be tonight.
Chris, I tell you what it does tell.
Does this mean
tells Republicans. Go ahead. I tell you what it tells Republicans Go ahead, Chris.
Does this mean the end of health care reform?
I think the Democrats will really try to ram it through the House, the Senate bill. That's what I would do if I were them. And they would say, look, you guys, we can't go home with nothing because there's no reason for us being here if we can't deliver on this. But let me say about this fellow Brown, Chris, what it does tell Republicans is what you want to run as in 2010 is an outsider, a populist candidate against the establishment. Don't make the Republican identification that huge because it's still not all that attractive a brand. But the Tea Party types and the populist types and the outsiders, they will vote Republican if that's the alternative to what they got in Washington, and that's the message.
Do you accept him as a conservative if he's pro-choice on a woman's right to choose, on abortion rights? Do you accept him as a colleague, as a fellow conservative if he takes that position, Pat?
Well, I would say he's certainly not a conservative on the life issue, but would I vote for him in Massachusetts against Coakley? In a heartbeat, of course. I will say this, Chris, I've never seen anybody piled on as badly, even before she's allegedly lost, as is being done to Martha Coakley by members of her own party and her own constituency.
Yeah.
What do you tell me the worst you've heard? Go ahead, you go, Gene, but he's right. There's been a lot of backbiting.
Kurt Schilling tried to bean him, it's awful. But you know who else is going to claim victory if Brown wins, by the way? Chairman Michael Steele will claim victory, and he will say that because he's now saying that he's essentially more of a Tea Partier, and so he's going to claim this as another notch in his belt if Brown wins.
But the Republicans did, Chris, put a lot of money apparently on the sly up there to help Brown before everybody suddenly awoke to the fact that, hey, we got a ball game up here.
Okay, so it's a victory for the Tea Party, also the Republican Party. They get to stop health care, and it's a win when he needs one for the Republican chairman, Michael Steele. Thank you, Gene Robinson. Thank you, Pat Buchanan. Up next, we're just under 20 minutes. What do I get my names wrong tonight? We got 20 minutes to go before the polls close. The returns are starting to trickle in. We're going to have some results tonight for probably, it could be the upset of the year, or if not the century, or it could be just another Democratic win in Massachusetts. We'll be right back with the rest of Hardball. For the rest of the country, you're watching it from Doyle's Cafe in Boston. This is Hardball, only on MSNBC, the place for politics. We're back from the hot dateline of American politics tonight, Boston, Massachusetts. We're at Doyle's Cafe, a big political hangout here, with just 15 minutes to go before the polls close. With the word from Steve Lynch down in down in Southie that does not look good. Nora O'Donnell's at the headquarters right now. She's chief Washington correspondent for MSNBC. She's at the Democratic headquarters of Martha Coakley, the Democratic nominee. I just got the word from Steve Lynch. Apparently, he's put out the word that does not look good. He sees a lot of Republican signs for Brown down in South Boston. Doesn't look good down there. Nora, your view. What do you got for us?
That's right. I'm hearing from people that turnout has not been good for Martha Coakley. It does not look good for her. They're talking about whether it's a 5-point loss or even higher than that. In fact, the Democrats here are pretty much bracing for a devastating defeat. The mood is pretty sour. And quite frankly, I'm shocked how they are already blaming one another for this loss and trying to figure out who's to blame for this campaign. Let me just read you, Chris, something I just got from a Democratic Party official saying that on December 19th, Martha Coakley had a 20-point lead. 3 weeks later, by January 5th, that lead was cut in half. Brown in that time went on the air, defined himself, and Martha Coakley was, quote, literally on vacation, according to this official, blaming her for going to the Caribbean during that time period when Scott Brown was defining himself and defining Martha Coakley. And this person says, as Scott Brown himself conceded, this race wasn't defined by feelings about the president. This race was defined by the lack of defining done by the Coakley campaign. That is from a Democratic Party official already talking about how Martha Coakley and her campaign did a terrible job, essentially got lazy for 3 weeks and allowed Scott Brown to define himself. Pretty stunning. Wow. I can't remember a House or Senate campaign I've covered or a presidential campaign where they've done something like that, spoken about another Democrat in that way, no matter what happened behind the scenes. But clearly that's going on at this point. And then just one other thing, Chris, because we were hearing that the Democrats here were sort of laying some groundwork to sort of make the case that there had been voting irregularities. What they say is there was a pattern where they found at some places there were these ballots being given out that had already been marked Scott Brown's name. But I specifically pressed the campaign, are you saying this election has been stolen? And they said, no, we just want people to know that there may have been some irregularities out there. Chris?
Yeah, right. Well, it looks like they're stirring the pot for blame. Thank you so much, Nora O'Donnell, with that stark report from Coakley headquarters. Even before the polls have closed, they're blaming people for losing. Let's go right now to MSNBC political analyst Mike Barnicle, who's in New York. Michael, the blame game has commenced.
Well, who would you blame other than the candidate? What, are you going to blame the voters? Like Dick Tuck used to say when he ran for office in California, the people have spoken, the bastards. You can't blame the voters. There's only one person you can blame, and that's the candidate.
Well, what do you make about vacations? What is it about Democrats and vacations? You know, Ned Lamont knocked off Joe Lieberman in that amazing upset in Connecticut. You remember that in 2006?
Sure.
Went off to Maine for 2 or 3 weeks and let Joe pick up his sticks and come back and win the general.
Look, Chris, you know, I don't know whether Martha Coakley went on vacation or not after Christmas. I don't know what she did. I do know this, and Nora alluded to it in the email she got from a Democratic operative, that for several weeks now, some key Democrats across the state have tried to offer advice and counsel to the Coakley campaign. It's been rejected. Until 2 weeks ago, the Coakley campaign did not have a pollster. They did not have any negative information on Scott Brown. They didn't really go through and cull his voting record. So in other words, they couldn't take him on. So she disappears from the scene for large portions of time in between the Democratic primary in early December and about 2 weeks ago. And how does she reemerge? With just a Niagara of negative ads on TV for the last 10 days. You couldn't watch television in the Boston market without seeing 2-3 minutes straight of negative ads. That's no way to introduce yourself to voters.
Do you have a sense that she allowed the other candidate to define her, allowed him to define himself, and then picked up late in the game, right on the eve of the campaign, and tried to trash him after people had a firm view of him and liked him? It was too late.
You know, I think the Democrats and the candidate, Martha Coakley, took this election for granted. They figured it was an automatic, a layup. After they won the primary, she was going to be the United States Senator. People don't like to be taken for granted, whether you're buying a refrigerator at Home Depot or whether you're buying a candidate for the United States Senate. They want to be asked for their vote, and they want some interaction with the candidate. They want to feel they know and perhaps even like the candidate. So Scott Brown defined himself. He didn't define Martha Coakley. He defined himself, riding around in the truck, going to every event imaginable. The guy was at the end of the drive-through window at McDonald's shaking hands. And Martha Coakley was
Would Eddie
AWOL.
Markey have won this race?
Eddie Markey would have won this race by 10.
Nominee.
He would have won the race by 10 points. Mike Capuano, if he had been able to beat her in the primary and he had her and let her go, he would have won by 10 points. Another good female candidate who was willing to define herself and the Democratic Party on the issues against Scott Brown, she would have won by 10 points.
Is there any way not to read this as at least a Massachusetts rejection of what they know of the president's health care plan?
Rejection or reticence about accepting it. I choose to think reticence about accepting it because they don't really grasp all the details, because the president and the administration hasn't really laid out all the details in terms of the public being able to understand it. I would say this, there's a real danger from the national outlets, from the national reporters, to misread the Scott Brown victory, and I think it will be a victory, a fairly substantial victory, as a victory, you were talking about it earlier, with the Tea Party people. I've spent several days with both campaigns, and the Brown campaign, you didn't see the Tea Party effect. What you saw is a lot of Democrats and a lot of independents, we were talking about it earlier, who were basically saying, like the old Verizon ad, can you hear me now, to Washington and to the State House in Boston. Much more so than the Tea Party nutcases.
Let's see if the president responds and says, I do hear something, because I think, as you know, politics is a conversation. And leaders have to show that they hear people when they make noise, or else they really resent them. Thank you, Mike Barnett, for that great report, great analysis on Massachusetts and what's going on up here tonight. Just minutes away now till the polls will be closed here in Massachusetts. Our coverage from Boston, right here on this site. We've got Dateline Integrity tonight. This is Hardball on MSNBC, the place for politics. Welcome back to Hardball from Doyle's Cafe in Boston. Polls in Massachusetts will be closed at the top of this hour. It's coming close. We'll start seeing results as the big Senate race here becomes clear who's going to win. With me now is Laura Pellegrini. She's with the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus, a great organization. Steve Kornacki's with the New York Observer. Laura, tell me, we were met a couple months ago, and things looked pretty good for Martha Coakley. She had opening. She was the woman in the race among four other guys. They say the shape of the field defines the winner.
Right.
Everything looked good. She's sharp, smart, likable, and how'd it go?
It's not over yet. It's not over yet, and we still have a few more minutes. So if folks haven't been out to vote and you're voting for Martha Coakley, get out. And every vote counts. And we think the race is close tonight.
Okay, great, Steve. You grew up here, and you were at the New York Observer. What do you sense is happening, and what does it mean to the country? Yeah. We got a whole national audience watching.
Yeah, well, I think two things. I think you talk about the women's aspect. This is interesting to me.
I thought there was a backlog of women. Hillary carried this state against Barack. I thought there'd be a strong push for any woman to win.
By my count, this is the 8th woman, Martha Coakley, who has run for the U.S. Senate or for governor in the state. And this is the 8th woman to lose. There has never been a woman who's run a marquee and won a marquee statewide race in Massachusetts. And if you look at the formula that Scott Brown is poised to use to win tonight, the voters that he's mobilized, the voters who are coming out, this is the same model that Mitt Romney used in 2002 when he ran against Shannon O'Brien. And Mitt Romney faced charges of sexism. He called her unbecoming, Shannon O'Brien, at the end of that campaign.
Yeah, but aren't most voters women?
Well, you look at what Mitt Romney did. Mitt Romney won 17 small and mid-sized cities in this state when he was elected governor. And Scott Brown, I want to see the returns tonight for places like Fitchburg, Mass, Lowell, near where I grew up. I want to see Brockton. I want to see Quincy. If you look at those blue-collar areas, I think there's a backlash brewing against Martha Coakley very similar to the one that Mitt Romney
from men or women or both?
From blue-collar male and female voters.
Is this a class campaign where working-class women are voting for Scott Brown, the Republican, because they don't like the high cost of everything or whatever.
Yeah, I think the issues right now in this country are very profound, whether we're talking about the economy and jobs or talking about domestic safety and domestic terrorism. And so I think some of that played into this today. And if you think about the voters of Massachusetts, the more and more they said that there could be an upset here, the more I think maybe people felt empowered. I can send a message to the White House.
Do you think the issue of abortion was raised in a way that didn't help the Democratic candidate?
That's why I want to see the returns from these blue-collar cities like Fitchburg and Lowell, where you have heavily Catholic populations that responded in 2002. We talk about Shannon O'Brien. One of the reasons she lost that campaign was because she came out against parental notification laws for teenagers, caused a backlash in those towns. You have Martha Coakley.
I remember Tim Russert, the late Tim Russert, asked the question to Shannon O'Brien, what was the right of a girl really to have an abortion at a young age, right?
Yeah,
and it seemed very young for people.
And a lot of people believe that in those blue-collar areas there was a backlash. And if you look at Martha Coakley talking about Catholics in the emergency rooms and maybe they shouldn't work there, how does that play in a place like Fitchburg? How does that play in a place like Lowell? Again, I grew up near Lowell. I know a lot of the people there. I don't think it plays very well.
Do you think women should spend more time on economic issues?
I think somewhat. I thought she ran a decent campaign. I think that we've got to redouble our efforts at the caucus and work a little harder. We don't have a great track record in the state of electing women. You can just look over the border to Maine and New Hampshire. We have women in the U.S. Senate, whether it be Olympia Snow, Susan Collins, U.S. Senator Shaheen, and we don't have a great track record in the state. And we really need to kind of regroup if things don't go well tonight and try to understand what's going on here. But I do think there are some unique issues going on right now. We saw it in the past elections in New Jersey and such that I think really transcend the gender issues.
Is this going to be a big national election? I'm asking the obvious. I think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. But we should have seen this coming to a certain degree. Maybe not the Massachusetts seat actually going, but there's a certain inevitability when one party controls the White House, both branches of Congress, and there's 10% unemployment. I know you're in the show. You talked about Ronald Reagan. Happened to him in 82.
I think if it weren't for the horror in Haiti right now, all eyes in the whole country would be on this race. I think a lot of eyes are on it anyway.
Absolutely.
It's not as important morally, perhaps, certainly as what's going on in Haiti, the horror there. But it is a huge story what's coming out of here tonight. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank
nice
you.
to see you again. Steve Kornacki, sir, grew up here, local boy. The polls are about to close right up here in Massachusetts. Stay with MSNBC all night. We are the place for politics. We're going to have live reports throughout the evening as returns do come in. We're not sure when they're going to come in. At midnight, we will definitely be back at this spot with all the news, with all the numbers. You'll know what happened, and you'll know it in full. Stay with us. This is a national election. Countdown with Keith Olbermann starts right now.
The polls have just this moment closed in Massachusetts. And closing with them, the prospect of health care reform from a Massachusetts Democratic congressman within the last 20 minutes, quote, "It doesn't look good," unquote. Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow? Heavy on the turnout, not so heavy on the intelligible sound bites from the candidates.
We don't pay attention, despite what everybody thinks, to all the media, to all the polls. We pay attention to the ground game and what people are telling us.
I would be the 41st senator, but it would make everybody the 41st senator.
The Senate will have to get more chairs. This is Countdown, special coverage of the Massachusetts senatorial election with Rachel Maddow and Chris Matthews in Boston, Howard Feynman and Richard Wolff in Washington, and Congressman Anthony Weiner. After asked what a Republican victory would do to health care reform, he said this morning.
I think you can make a pretty good argument that health care might be dead.
He said that, but the Speaker of the House said this.
In spite of all the activity that I know you're aware of in Massachusetts and the rest, we're still on course. We will have a health care reform bill, and it will be soon.
Haiti, night 8, another urgent reason for aid. From the State Department, 4,500 Americans evacuated, 5,500 Americans missing or just not accounted for. Worsts, he points out her financial discrepancies. Politico.com points out his tax discrepancies. And tonight's quick comment, my apology to Scott Brown. All the news and commentary now on Countdown.